Yo, what's good, guys? It's your boy Sonnyboy 817 and I'm back with like a new video. This video is actually just like a history project I did like a week ago. So like you had to record a podcast and I decided to turn that into a video because like low-key my channel's been like starved and stuff. So like and subscribe and enjoy. Canada often tells a story of peace, inclusion, and equality. But over a century, Black Canadians have lived through a different story, one of resilience in the face of exclusion. Today, I want to walk you through 5 key moments in Black Canadian history that helped to reshape this country, not just its laws, but how we see each other and ourselves. Let's start in World War I, the creation of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. So basically, to explain, black men weren't allowed in combat units, but that didn't stop them from persevering and volunteering anyway, building trenches and roads in segregated units. Even as their country refused to see them as equals, they still stepped up. It wasn't just labor, it was loyalty. Their service cracked open a conversation about what being Canadian really means. And a century later, the government's apology in 2022 showed their legacy didn't fade, it grew. In my personal opinion, I feel like the way black people chose to deal with the segregation and discrimination they faced during the World War really showed how much black resilience they had, and it's a theme that you'll see present as we go through this podcast. Now, speaking of stories that we'll get into, jumping to 1946, we meet a black woman named Viola Desmond who walks into a Nova Scotia theater. She sits in a seat labeled whites only, and when she's asked to move, she refuses to move because of course, you know, she walked in a theater with a ticket that she owns. But what happens is Viola Desmond gets arrested. It's a quiet moment. The effects that this story had on black culture in Canada speaks a lot. The story took place even nearly 10 years before the infamous Rosa Parks incident. Desmond made it clear, racism isn't just an American problem. Her story forced Canada to confront the lie that it was somehow different. And as someone who has been through both the American and the Canadian education system, I will admit I can see like why there is an issue with how people like to portray Canada as like this country that is completely free, because even in elementary I'd hear stories about how Canada was mainly acting in good faith, but as I got to like higher grades, it turned out that wasn't true. So I think a lot of these stories do address that problem. Would be Rosemary Brown. In the 1970s, she didn't just enter politics, she stormed it. The first black woman elected to be a provincial legislator. The first to run for federal party leadership. She didn't soften her voice to be accepted. She made politicians listen. She made voters reimagine who belongs in power, and her leadership didn't just open doors, it knocked down walls. I think it's pretty safe to say that she set an example for other black women on how to not tolerate injustice and discrimination. Anyways, on to our next topic. In the 90s, a different kind of resistance occurred. Black Canadian artists began taking up space in music, TV, and film. From artists like Mechi Me to Rap City on Much Music, black culture was no longer hidden. It was loud, it was proud, and it was ours. It wasn't just about being famous, it was about being visible. The youth finally saw themselves being reflected, and the silence that once surrounded their identities began to break. Mechi Me in particular was the first Canadian rapper signed to a major American label, the Atlantic Records. Music blended Jamaican dancehall and hip-hop, and she broke open doors for hip-hop in Canada at the time when it barely had a presence. Finally, then came 2020, where an incident occurred that unified the black community as a whole. After George Floyd was murdered in the US, something broke and something moved across Canada, and thousands took to the streets in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. They marched for Rigas Kurashingshiki, for Chantel Moore, and for every name that was whispered and forgotten or a victim of racial discrimination and profiling. Black Lives Matter in Canada didn't just call for justice, It demanded visibility, and the movement in general forced Canadians to ask, who gets protected, who gets punished, and why? The protests didn't fix everything, of course, but they made it impossible to look away. And suddenly, conversations about policing, education, healthcare, and equality weren't optional. They were necessary and long overdue. Each of these moments, the battalion, the theater seat, the campaign stage, the music scene, and the march, weren't just footnotes. They were turning points and steps towards equality. They show how Black Canadians over and over forced the country to wake up, to look in the mirror, and to choose change. Alright, so believe it or not, there was actually like an ending to this. Like right here, I added like an extra part where like some crazy stuff happens, but maybe I'll include that in like the next video, like a link to it. If this video gets like 10 likes or something. Anyways, I'm out. Yo, how do we get back? How do we get inside?
My dad? What a shame. I really don't want that to happen.
How do we get inside?
Where's the plug?
How do we get inside?
I'll get in.
How? How do you get in? Yo, how do you get in? Yo, how do you get in? Yo, I clipped that. How do you get in? Genuinely, how do you get in? How do you get in?